the stream. Go to the thing. Oh no, it's going to be infinite mode. Oh, go right there. Yep, there it is. Ha ha. Oh, yeah, it's just going to be this. Okay, hold on. Boop, boop, boop. All right. All right. Well, let's get this thing started, and I've actually got my key here, so we can go right on through. Although I didn't do the extra credit, but it's fine. I did the extra credit on the online version. So yeah, for you online folks, I've already got the test done. I did it over the weekend, so go me, I guess. So that'll go up on Wednesday as well. Please get it done as soon as possible because, well, we have the final coming up at the end of the month. So let's do this. All right. Early pushes to American imperialism, pre-imperial era, markets and takeovers. So before we even get to proper American imperialism, well, you can argue either way, but we'll just go with that. Pre-imperial America, going all the way back to right after the Civil War, what was the main focus for the U.S. government when it came to expanding the United States? Said at the beginning of this chapter that you could sort of see it as imperialistic because it was taking land and using resources, but it could also be argued that maybe it wasn't. The first main focus of the U.S. government following the Civil War as far as land acquisition.
Native.
Right, which meant what? Literally y'all's first paper. Exactly. Heading west. Westward Expansion. I mean, yeah, Native Americans technically correct. But, yeah, Westward Expansion. So, yeah, technically, under 19th century definition of imperialism, it's not imperialism because it's land that's connected to the country that's taking the land, but I'd say by 21st century imperialism standards, yeah, that's pretty imperialistic. We're just like taking sovereign land. So, yeah, pretty even split here with the, well, not, whatever. Okay, at the beginning of American imperialism, what country was the main targeted market for industrial products? What main country were we going after to try to push our products on? Yes, China, because big population means lots of people to buy American products, which wasn't just America, it was also like, Germany and France and Britain and all the other big imperial powers. But since this is an American history course, we're just talk about America. But for those of you that are in both of my classes, you're seeing just this twice, essentially. Let me see. So while trying to gain access to China, what island chain was taken over by white plantation owners and American Marines? Hawaii. Right, remember that was a whole thing. That wasn't some simple like, oh, they want to be American citizens. No, that was a pretty hostile takeover, I'd say. Let's see. Oh, I guess that would be, yeah, that'd be all for that one. Just leave that space there. Ahead of the economic incentives, what was the first wave of American imperialism? Like, what did they send out before they started trying to establish markets in these regions? I think I heard it. Missionaries. Yeah, they sent out missionaries to, get the culture ready for Westward expansion. This could be in either this Americanism expansion. Well, no, this one isn't really just Americanism. This is more the overall mindset. A couple of individuals to remember. Who wrote The White Man's Burden, which suggested the burden of white men was to spread the light of civilization to the rest of the world? Again, those of you in my European history course are probably going to need to know this one twice. Who wrote The White Man's Burden? Kipling. Rudyard Kipling. He was a British guy. That's why I'll say he wouldn't go under just American ideals. This was the overall idea of the time. Which again, it was satire, but it seems like nobody got British satire, even other Britons, so whatever, I guess. What else do we have? What did Alfred Mahan think would undermine military security due to this group's supposed unwillingness to use force? So this wasn't something that had happened yet, but this was a push for a change in society, and he believed that if this happened, it would undermine military security. Because he believed that they were unwilling to use force. And if you remember anything about Alfred Mahan, you'd probably remember what I'm talking about. Exactly. Alfred Mahan was like, oh, if women get the right to vote, we won't have war anymore. Imagine. And one more for this, and this sort of goes off of Mahan, because he was one of the main proponents of this idea. What was the term for those who felt war was necessary to maintain civilization and one's manhood? Technically, the question is for the people, but I'll take the idea as well. The people that felt war was necessary for civilization and manhood. What's that? I'm sorry, say that again. You're looking at the right word, but spell it real quick. Jingoist. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, all the letters are pronounced because it's not French. Yeah, jingoist. Or the idea is jingoism. Either is fine. Technically, the question is asking for jingoist, but jingoism is fine as well. There's some like British saying like, "By jingo, if we have to fight, we will." It's like I don't know what that has to do with anything, but they just ran with it. The British are weird. Okay. Yeah. On to the next one, which is going to be a lot of Cuba. A lot of Cuba. This was this was like really one of the more important parts of this chapter. As much as we're going to talk about World War I, we also need to talk about this. So, Cuba. Against what country did Cuba fight a war of independence with some minor aid from the United States at the end? Spain. Cuba was fighting Spain. I mean, if you know anything about Cuba, they speak Spanish, so obviously they had Spanish overlords. All right. What was the main advantage that the Cuban rebels had over their colonial overlords? What advantage did they have over the Spanish? What's that? Immunity to what? Yeah, to the tropical diseases. Because Cuba is pretty tropical, and if you're not from that area, you're probably not used to all the fun malaria and whatnot that's going on there. So before we got involved in what was called the War of 1898, because that's when we actually got there, let's see. What was the term for the type of journalism used by reporters covering the war, often using atrocities to gain support? Say that again? Yes, yellow journalism. Very good. All right. What event on February 15th, 1898 pushed America into the war in Cuba? What was the singular event that actually pushed America into the war? Yes. The sinking / explosion / whatever of the Maine. Sorry, the USS Maine. And again, remember, it was like, I mean, it just exploded out of nowhere, and it's like, oh, it was definitely the Spanish. The Spanish apparently have like pyrokinesis or something. They just blew it up with their brains. Let's see. This one's a little bit more specific, but I'm pretty sure it was. Yeah, it was. Highlighted in the book, so I put it in the test. What was the name of the amendment which pledged to aid Cuban independence but limited its sovereignty afterwards? It was the thing that I mentioned in the notes of it pledged for a free Cuba but only after it was pacified. What was that? Yes, the Teller Amendment. Very good. And that was a really big deal for how Cuba was going to be treated afterwards. Oh, hey, here's one I hope you guys know. What group did Teddy Roosevelt form and lead in the war in Cuba? Which I literally asked last test. The Rough Riders. Because it was mentioned in this last chapter, so hey, it's on this test too. You're welcome. I think we have one more for Cuba. What was the term for Cuba's diplomatic position with the United States immediately following their war? So what was Cuba to the U.S. once they were independent from Spain? Protectorate, yeah. They weren't quite a territory. They were sort of independent, but they also had to go through the U.S. for a lot of diplomatic procedures, or protectorate, which is something that Britain did a lot. It's like, oh, you can have your independence, but also if you want to do any kind of foreign trade, you have to go through us. Okay, meanwhile, on the other side of the world, what U.S. military leader defeated a flotilla in Manila Bay on May 1st, 1898? He was I thought he was Commodore. No, he was an admiral. There was like 6 Americans slightly injured and something like 200 Spanish killed. No, sorry, 400 Spanish. Jesus Christ. Remember this admiral's name? Manila Bay. George Dewey. Admiral George Dewey. And what was the island chain that was later taken over by the United States around the same time as the Cuban War for Independence, which is to say the island chain that Manila was part of? What's that? Philippines. Yeah, if you said that, I misunderstood you. Sorry. Yeah, the Philippines, which we had that whole video on about the fact that this was not a simple, they defeated the Spanish and then the Philippines were like, hey, this is great. Now we're independent of Spain, but we're under American control. This is great, no problem. It was like a 14-year war with the Filipinos. And we did lots of war crimes, like killing 200,000 civilians. So, onward to Central America. Let me see. Oh, wow. Okay. So nothing for short answer for a while. Okay. So after Roosevelt became president, Theodore Roosevelt specifically, we're not talking about FDR until next chapter. Who suggested that the United States invest in a canal across the Isthmus of Panama? We've already briefly talked about him. Who suggested we put a canal across Panama? I guess technically he would have suggested it to McKinley, but Roosevelt's the one that actually got the work started. He was one of the ones that was all for this expansion. He's not been an answer yet, but he's been in the question. What's that? No, Roosevelt's in the question. No, Roosevelt's the president. This guy is advising Roosevelt to. What's that? No. No. No, this was one of the jingoists we mentioned before. It said we needed to have war to have civilization, and women shouldn't vote. So Theodore Roosevelt became president. Who was the one that suggested to him that the United States should invest in a canal across the Isthmus of Panama? Yes, Alfred Mahan. Or Mahan. Not sure the actual pronunciation. I think it's Mahan. Because he was the one we talked about earlier in the test. He's like the main guy behind American expansionism and jingoism and all of that, besides Roosevelt himself. Okay, what country did Roosevelt have to negotiate with in order to gain rights to build the Panama Canal before there was the independence movement that got Panama its independence? Colombia, right. Colombia owned the land that was Panama before all this. So Roosevelt had to negotiate with Colombia to get permission to build the Panama Canal to begin with. And a bunch of other countries too, but that's not important. And after the Panama Canal was built, what did the president add to the Monroe Doctrine to signal the U.S. intended to intervene in Western Hemisphere affairs? Yeah, the Roosevelt Corollary. That's the T there. Let me make sure I even spell it right. C-O-R-O-L-L-A-R-Y. Corollary. Corollary. It's not a word we use in everyday speech, you know. Yeah, just sort of an addition to the Monroe Doctrine. An addendum, if you will. Kind of an asterisk at the end. It's like, you know, we won't mess with your stuff if you don't mess with ours, but also we're going to interfere with all of everything here in the Western Hemisphere. All right, on to Asia. Let's see, China first, I suppose. What was the name of the nationalist uprising which America helped to suppress in order to gain a foothold in China? Boxer Rebellion, which, yes, again, those of you in my European history class will need to know. Twice. And as for Japan, surprise, surprise, in 1904, 1905, what country did Japan defeat in order to gain international prestige? Russia. We're talking about the Russo-Japanese War again, because I really find that war interesting. And after this war, or at least bringing this war to an end, what American president helped to settle the peace terms before sending the U.S. fleet on something of a victory lap? It was Roosevelt again. Do I have any? No, that's it for this section. What's that? No. If you need clarification, that's fine. I don't mind. But yeah, Roosevelt helped to end the Franco-Prussian War because he was like, oh no, Russia's losing and this is bad because racism. Yeah, Russia got whooped. And then after helping to settle the peace terms, he sent the U.S. Navy on a victory lap for reasons. I don't know. That one was weird. 19th century was just weird in general. All right. Before we even start World War I / the Great War, because what the hell was that? Is everybody okay? We're not getting invaded, are we? Demons coming through the computer. Look, I've seen enough J-horror. I don't want to deal with that. All right. Before World War I started, what country did the United States have diplomatic tensions with, resulting in a failed raid across national borders? Mexico. We only have two countries that we share national borders with, and I don't recall raids into Canada. That was in the 1700s. That's a whole separate thing. Mexico. We did have tensions with Germany to a degree, but that's a little bit later. Yeah, we had issues with Mexico. Wilson and hell, even a little bit before, Taft was dealing with that. All right. Boop, boop. Now, for the big one, what event actually sparked World War I in Europe? The assassination of assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie. Because that's usually mentioned. I think it's only mentioned in my European history book, but I put it here anyway. All right. What cruise liner was sunk by the Germans, which prompted many Americans to call for war? No, a cruise liner was sunk. It was sunk by U-boats. The Lusitania. Remember, technically it was a cruise liner, but it was also technically full of munitions. It's like, oh no, they sunk a civilian ship. They just so happen to be carrying munitions, but we're going to ignore that. How dare they murder innocent civilians that we put on top of boxes of munitions? Speaking of which, during the Great War, the British used a blockade against the Central Powers. What was the German response? U-boats. See, we got there. U-boats. Undersea Bolton. All right. Dun, 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 dun. Right. What missive or telegram was one of the last tipping points towards America joining the First World War? The Zimmerman telegram. Also often just called the Zimmerman Note for some reason. Zimmerman telegram. That was the whole, like, hey, Mexico, if America joins the Allies and you guys join us and we win, you can have bits of America. And we're like, hey, that's not cool. All right. One more thing happening over in Europe, and then we're going to get to the home front. What event in Russia weakened the Allies and made the ending of the war that much harder? What's a big important event in Russia? Yes. That's actually completely correct. The Bolshevik Revolution. Yeah. See, again, when it's not French, you just say all the letters. The Bolshevik Revolution. I mean, I'm sure we probably just put a little bit of Russian accent to it, but yeah, that's Bolshevik. Yeah, because they had their own little civil war going on, and they didn't really have time to deal with anything else. I mean, there's a bit more to that, but this isn't a European history class. Okay, I think that's everything for Europe, but there's a lot going on in America. So, here we go. This is where the drinking game starts. Who was in charge of the Food Administration in the U.S. said that children planting vegetable gardens was just as real and patriotic an effort as the building of ships or the firing of cannon? Who's in charge of the Food Administration in World War I? Who was in charge of every federal administration in this whole chapter? Not Roosevelt. Hoover. This is when Hoover starts. I'll put her. No, you know what? I'm going to have to put Hoover because I'm going to be writing it a lot. No, Roosevelt's out. Roosevelt doesn't do anything else from this point on, at least until FDR, Roosevelt. But yeah, no, this is when Hoover is just in charge of everything. Let's see. What two acts passed by Congress in 1917 and 18 were used to keep people from speaking out against the draft or expressing any ideals that were seen as un-American? So two acts that kept people from speaking out against anything that was, well, really speaking out against the government at all. Again, for those of you that were here last semester, this is the same thing that Jefferson did. Espionage and sedition, yes. Correct. Yeah, when I was looking at pictures for these for 101, I got a lot of the really modern ones because, well, they were the ones that people really remembered rather than the ones that Jefferson did for the War of 1812. Let's see. Okay, that's all for that. So let's go back over here. Who got in trouble for saying the draft was a form of slavery and was sentenced to 10 years in prison, though he got pardoned after 3? This is a fellow we've talked about a couple of times through multiple chapters. So we've seen him before. This gentleman got in trouble for saying the draft was a form of slavery and was sentenced to 10 years in prison, though he did get pardoned after 3. Yes, Eugene V. Debs. We've seen him since the worker unions chapter. So he's been here and there ever since. So I think this is the last time he shows up. All right. What was the main aspect of Wilson's 14 points, which he felt would keep another world war from happening? So the 14 points have a lot of pretty good ideas, but what was the main one I told you guys to remember? The League of Nations. Yeah. I mean, like I said, again, some of them are very specific, like we should have a Poland and we should redistribute certain bits of land. It's like, okay, those are very specific, but the League of Nations is just like the one to remember. So he got the League of Nations ratified in Europe. Who led the anti-treaty action against Wilson in the United States? Because, I mean, a lot of Congress just didn't agree, but there was one individual who led the anti-treaty cause against Wilson. Because for the sake of a test, we need one name. What's that? He had a pretty unique name. Or at least it made for good propaganda, or it made for good political cartoons. So the guy that led the anti-treaty action against Wilson in the U.S. because a lot of people didn't want the League of Nations in the United States. Specifically, his last name made for a good political cartoon. Yeah, Henry Cabot Lodge. Because remember that the final image I had was the peace treaty was an animal skin nailed up onto to the Cabot Lodge. Yeah, Henry Cabot Lodge. All right, that's that chapter. See, we can do a lot in one chapter if we really try. Okay, and also there's plenty to talk about in American imperialism and world wars, right? Actually, hold on, let me just pop back. There we go. No. There we go. Okay. Boop, boop, boop. So, Great War is over. However, people are terrified of communism. Oh no. What is the name for the general fear of communism overrunning America? The Red Scare. We're scared of the Reds. I almost literally wrote Reds Scare because I was saying that out loud. Okay. The Red Scare. Makes me think of like the Scarlet Mask. So in response to the Red Scare and actually a bombing event, what series of legal crackdowns saw American liberty suspended for the sake of safety from these communist threats? And threats are in quotes. What was the legal crackdowns in 1919 and 1920? The Palmer raids, yes. Everybody okay? Make sure we're awake this morning, I guess. So the Palmer raids were a response to the Red Scare, and in response to the Palmer raids, what group was formed in order to protect American liberties and freedoms from government overreach and overreactions? So what was formed to protect American liberties from government overreach?
The American Civil Liberties Union?
Yes, the ACLU, or American Civil Liberties Union. I will actually take either one. For the American Medical Association, I prefer the longer name. For the ACLU, ACLU is fine, but I'll take the full name as well. Either works. ACLU is pretty distinct. AMA is kind of broad. Oh, that's actually it for that section. We have one under here. Beep, beep. Far more devastating than the Great War itself. When a natural disaster hit in 1918, killing between 50 to 100 million people worldwide. The influenza pandemic, known as the Spanish flu, but that wasn't a good name for it, so I'm not calling it that. Okay. All right, so that's immediately after the Great War. Now on to racism, because, you know, we got to talk about that, because it's America. Let's see, the Red Summer. Oh, yay. In what American city did the worst racial violence known as the Red Summer occur? What was the main city we talked about for that? I mean, I showed you a map with a bunch of cities, but like we talked about one major city. What's that? Well, it was on Lake Michigan. What city? Chicago. And again, having been past Lake Michigan, I don't know why they'd want to be swimming in it, but I guess 100 years ago it wasn't quite as gross as it is today. Okay, is that? Okay. Wait a minute. Let me. Yeah, I got ahead of myself here. Where was the Ku Klux Klan refounded in the 1920s? Where was the KKK refounded in the 1920s? Not Chicago. That's where it was founded originally, I believe. And this was the refounding. I would say it's not super far from here, but it's a bit of a drive. Not super far from where I used to teach. Not Tennessee. Where in Georgia? Because it's that big monument in Georgia. Near Atlanta, Georgia. But where? What's the name of the monument? It's Stone Mountain. Yes, we got there. Stone Mountain. It's multiple choice. There's not actually a state on there, but it is technically Georgia. Yes. And I thought it said 9:30. I was like, oh crap, we're running out of time. Running out of time. Running out of brain power. What were the two symbols of the KKK after their refounding? Yes. You both got the words. American flag and burning cross. Make sure you don't get those mixed up. Because burning the flag is a bit different than burning the cross. Apparently, like you would think that burning a symbol was a bad thing, but apparently it's not when it's the cross. I don't know. All right. Economy. We're almost there. All right. Here we go. Who was the Secretary of Commerce who pushed for the American plan of tying health insurance and pension plans to jobs in order to weaken unions? Who was the Secretary of Commerce pushed for the American plan of tying health insurance and pension plans to jobs in order to weaken unions? Most of that isn't important. This is someone who's in charge of a federal position. It's Hoover. I mean, it is important that you know like what he did and why he did it because it's history. But for the sake of the question, it's somebody in charge of a federal position, so it's Hoover. Like, for the sake of the test, it's a federal position, so it's definitely Hoover. What was the name of this? Oh, shoot. That was Hoover was supposed to be down here. I'm sorry. My my study guide and my test are a little bit out of whack. Okay. Production line. That's supposed to be this one here. What automaker perfected the assembly line, helped to push the second industrial revolution in the United States? Let's say literally the only auto producer we talked about. So Ford. Europe and especially Germany were hard pressed to repay war loans. What system of revolving door loans did the United States set up to get recovery funds flowing? So what was the loans to Germany to try to get the repayment moving? We give loans to Germany so they could pay back loans to France and Britain, so France and Britain could pay back loans to us, which was totally a great idea. I mean, it was sort of sound, but there were other issues. Was that? I thought I heard it. Yeah, the Dawes Plan. All right. I guess we could put this one up here. Since this was like the very beginning of the economic booming. The name of the scandal which saw government officials divvying out land to the Mammoth Oil Company in exchange for under-the-counter cash. That was like the first thing we talked about with the economy was the big scandal. Teapot Dome. That's all the book really mentioned. It's called the Teapot Dome scandal. It was with an oil company, and some government officials got in trouble. Like, that's all it told me, but it was a name that I remembered. So, hopefully, you guys can remember it. Yeah, that's it for that. So he already mentioned Hoover because he helped create the system to attack unions because Hoover doesn't like unions. And another really great one. Where did real estate speculation boom in the 1920s, only to crash after storms caused land value to drop in 1926 and 1928? Somebody said it, I didn't hear it. What's that? No, land speculation. Where was real estate speculation? Where was land being bought in the 1920s, but then land values crashed due to storms in 26 and 28? Of course, it's Florida. Apparently, nobody had just been in Florida for any period of time for hurricanes coming through every year. I mean, also it's mostly swamp. What were they doing? Okay, a couple of things here. Okay, that's the last one there. What was the name of the belief that the Bible was meant to be read literally, which was a response to the changing moral values in the United States? It's very popular in this part of the country. What's that? No. No, you're a step ahead. Now, this belief that the Bible was meant to be read literally, which actually came about in Los Angeles somehow. Say that again? Yes. Fundamentalism. And what scientific idea became a problem for the fundamentalists, which culminated in a court case in Dayton, Tennessee? That was evolution. I don't actually really go into what evolution is in the question. It was just enough that it caused the court case in Dayton, Tennessee. Who wrote On the Origin of Species, which caused the previous issue, despite the argument in the Dayton court case never actually coming up, which is to say the descent of man? Darwin, Charles Darwin. Who wrote On the Origin of Species, which is where evolution comes from, but the actual argument in the Dayton, Tennessee court case was, how dare you say that man came from monkeys? It's like, that's not what Darwin said. But, you know. Okay, 2 more questions, and then we'll be done. So, what event on October 29th, 1929, the year my grandmother was born, began the Great Depression in America and consequently the rest of the world? Yeah, the stock market crash. And the final question, who was the president of the United States at the beginning of the Great Depression? Herbert freaking Hoover. All right, and then the back is a bunch of extra credit that I should probably actually fill in. But yeah, so as a reminder, in case I forget on Wednesday because I don't remember things on test days, Wednesday is our test. Next week is our spring break, so don't show up because I will be asleep. And the week after is panic week for me. So if you guys have any questions, let me know, email me, whatever. See y'all on Wednesday.